Artificial intelligence is reshaping how students learn and how teachers teach. Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of your hosts, along with Shelley Steele. We're retired educators who worked in adjacent school districts in Ontario in restorative practices, and now we're retired, and we're working with principals and teachers in restorative practices. Our guest again this episode is Dr. Luther Brown of Subannah EduConsulting. He's a retired principal from the Toronto area and author of the book Leading from Where We Are, Challenging the Status Quo. Dr. Brown challenges us to rethink content delivery and focus on critical thinking. AI and technology are reshaping learning, assessment, and teaching identity, requiring educators to move from delivering content to developing critical thinking.
Hi, I'm Paula, an AI voice with some AI-generated text. This episode is brought to you by how AI impacts student learning. AI is shifting motivation from compliance to purpose. Students increasingly ask, why should I do this if AI can do it? This question is not resistance, it's a signal. When tasks emphasize originality, real-world application, collaboration, reflection, voice and choice, student engagement rises. When tasks emphasize recall, worksheets, isolated essays, student engagement drops because AI can do those easily. The hidden shift is that AI isn't just changing learning tools, it's exposing the need to change learning design.
Our website, www.restorative.ca, is for principals and teachers who navigate difficult conversations with parents who want to make things right and who want to make it all about student learning. New to your position in the last 4 years or so, send me an email, stan@restorative.ca. Shelley's away this week, so let's get into the conversation with your host, me, Stan. Now, you mentioned status quo for educators, and I'm going to be really broad strokes here. The
Yeah,
status quo is quite comfortable,
of
right?
course it is.
The status quo is where I went to school, how I am in school, and parents too are quite comfortable with the status quo. So
Mhm.
there's a bit of a risk involved in challenging the status quo. How do you encourage adults to challenge the status quo?
Okay, so first of all, we in education educate for change. Change does not happen unless the status quo is breached. Let's think about when the first under 1 minute or whatever when the world record was broken for the first time for the mile. All right. Lots of people were running and trying to break that. And people came close and people fainted, et cetera, et cetera. And then someone strategized and said, you are the 4 best mile runners, okay, in this area. So why don't we do something? We're going to run the mile in a certain way. You will run the first part of the mile. So it was like a relay. And if I am working so that you would be the winner at the end of the thing, your job is to be able to stay with whoever is the pace setter at the time and manage that until you get to the end. That's how we shattered the under a minute mile, under or whatever 5-minute mile. I don't remember what it was, but that's how it was shattered, because there was a level of collaboration to make that work. That is challenging the status quo. Medicine said that it was impossible to run the mile at that speed, and they proved medicine wrong. And since that time, that mile has been run at several record speeds after that. So challenging the status quo is important. And if we are working with parents, we don't have to call it challenging the status quo. We can just talk about the change that we're trying to produce. I went to a school and the results were horrible. The academic output as measured by EQAO is horrible. The kids were great. The teachers were great. The parents were great. And they were nice. And I realized that the teachers were really working hard. But as the new principal in the building, you're observing. Okay. And I would have side conversations. You guys are working really hard, and the results don't show. What are we going to do about it? And so we had those conversations one-on-one and one-on-one. And then we went to a staff meeting. And I raised it. I said, this is what I see. And I told them, giving them examples of the work that they were doing that were really demonstrating hard energy, hard work. They were providing snacks and food for people. They were providing clothes. They were doing all kinds of things. Then we said, we came to the understanding that maybe we're not teaching them what they need to know for the measure that is coming up. It's not because we're not teaching them. It's not because we're not good. It's not because they're not bright. But we weren't in sync. The congruency just, and then we decided as a staff to change that, to change our practice. And we changed it from kindergarten. And kindergartens know what they were going to hand off to grade one, and grade ones knew what they were going to hand off, and they held each other accountable. And the kind of accountability I'm talking about is not, oh, it's your fault, so you're in trouble. It's how do we help each other to get there? And we turned that school around within a 5-year period to amazing results. It attracted the one of the associate directors from the board to come on a visit. I knew what the visit was about, but it was like that wasn't it. Anyway, we eventually got to that. And when the question was asked, I said, I think you should just go from class to class, pick any teacher you want, and ask them, how did this turnaround happen? Okay. And because the question was also posed, how do you know this wasn't a fluke? I said, that's where you need to go talk to them. And I find that worked. And the whole staff was mobilized. And when I say the whole staff, don't think that everyone was just in lockstep. It wasn't. We still had to go through those negotiations. The people who wanted to stay with the old method and the old artifacts that they were using and the support material that they were accustomed to. But then when we recognize, is this material getting us where we want? We had a different story. And so that's the way I think we approach conversations with staff. And that's the way we challenge the status quo. I think those are ways that, for me, produced outcomes. And the other thing one other thing I just want to comment on is that schooling outcomes don't just happen. They're produced by the systems and the determinative environment that we work in. So the policies, the financing, the staffing, all of those things. And if you were to just take a quick look across the board, you will find that in buildings where a lot of those needs are met, you have a different result. But there are still a group of people for whom the results don't seem to materialize. Okay? There's much statistics to say that Black and other minoritized students aren't getting the results they want. But we have a very good way of figuring it out. We talk about meritocracy. And we talk about how it's because they're not working hard enough, or it's because the parents aren't, or it's because, and how do you expect me to do that in this classroom of, right? So it goes back to the students and the parents. And I'm saying, don't we need to stop and look at the determinative environment, that environment that determines what can actually be produced? Okay, so if I know that there is a student in my class who needs additional time to learn the stuff, how do we as a building manufacture that time? Right? How do we as individual teachers work around that? And how do I, as a principal or a leader in that building, support those teachers or those adults and the other professionals who are coming in to make it work so that it's not a burden for them and so that they don't feel put up on? And because we are working to materialize our GPS as we go along, it becomes a part of what we do. And the culture of the school becomes, this is what we do. And the culture is, we're not status quo.
I love your story of the school that you worked with, and I love where it started. Your observation, and then your question to the staff, what are we going to do about it? I thought that has to be the place that we start, as opposed to, here's what I think we need to do.
There you go. As adults, we don't like to be, go over there, sit over there, do that. We don't like to be told that. And as professionals, I really like you to trust my professional judgment. So give me that opportunity to show you my professional judgment. And then if it doesn't meet the measure of the production outcome that we want, we can talk about that. And people are reasonable and rational about that for the most part. Because if we know that this is the result we're trying to produce, and the way we are trying to do the work to produce it, it isn't generating that, we will internally look to say, how do we do differently?
I also love the way that you describe that we're about change as educators. And
Mhm.
one of the big things in terms of the context that we find ourselves in is that we have artificial intelligence, and that is changing the nature of education. Educators who have grown up in systems and have been part of teaching content
Mhm.
now suddenly, like, I have grandkids that are 7 who say, why didn't you just Google that?
Mhm.
And so how can we help challenge that status quo of, I'm here to deliver some content, in
Mhm.
the context of artificial intelligence too? Because it's for the teachers but also for the parents, because the parents
Mhm.
are, whoo, what is all this about?
Yeah. Okay, so this is a huge one because there are many ways to actually come to this. But let me come to it first from the standpoint of it's technology. I remember the technology when I was going to primary school back in 3,000 years ago was a slate and a pencil. Okay. And then it evolved to a exercise book and a pencil and pen and paper and penmanship and cursive, and because that was the technology of the day. The technology of today is different and it is changing like rapidly. It is malpractice, I think, for us to expect that the generation that we're working with now should go back and live in our paper and pencil days or in our big clunky computer age when I can do this, right? So the challenge is to say, how do we use the technology to help us produce the outcomes that we want? What do we need to do differently? So they're going to go to Chat GPT and they're going to say, write me an essay. And Chat will write them an essay. Yeah, but as a teacher, I know you can't write like that because you don't have that language and you don't have the skills yet to provide me the kind of syntax, etc., that I'm getting. So my thing is not to say, hey, I'll take your stuff. You just copy this. Because we used to say that when people used to come back with stuff copying from the encyclopedia. But I think a way to do this is to say, okay, I see you did some work on this. Talk to me a little bit about how we got to this place. Now, let's do the critical thinking. Okay. And as the professional, I get to raise the critical questions. I get to ask, how do you, could you explain this for me? Not trying to show the person up, but to invite them to participate in a different way. Because when we were copying from the encyclopedia, we were always told, go ahead and make a pressay. You say the word press and all people say, what the hell are you talking about? Right? But we were told, don't give me back the thing that is there. You got to give it to me in your own words. And then we learned later on that you have to give credit. So now you need to say where you got it from. So guess what? If you use ChatGPT to help you write your story, say that. It gives credibility to your presentation. And then it allows you and I to have the conversation about how to transform that into your work that you've supported, rather than this is the work that I get and I'm going to rewrite it in my own words. But it comes to one of the things that I believe is really important. If we don't teach critical thinking skills in our day-to-day, from kindergarten all the way through, we are preparing youngsters to not function well in this environment. And this environment is not waiting. And there is no turning it back. And we might as well say, you know what? We got ChatGPT and whatever the other ones are. How do we, as professionals, include them in what we're doing? Imagine if a doctor were to say, I'm not going to use computer technology to do this operation.
I would get another doctor.
Exactly. And the other thing too, and I'm random like this, but the other thing too is, if we are education professionals, we must make time to read. We must. And I hear people say, I don't have time to read because classwork and this work and that work. No, there are developments happening that are impacting your work, impacting your world, impacting your efficiency, impacting your effectiveness. If you don't know about them, how do you incorporate them? So you got to find a way to read. Now, we're also in an age where you can read by listening through a podcast, or you don't have to be reading through a book page by page. You could, because you might be tactical and you like that, and you might be wanted to mark it up and that kind of stuff. And it's probably easier for you in this form, but there's so many ways to read and to get information delivered to your mailbox. So I think the technology, we got to face it as to what it is, know it's there, and then figure out how do we use it differently.
Is there a final story or comment or something else that you'd like to say in conclusion or in summary?
I'd like to say to the education professionals who are listening right now, and it filters out broadly to all of us. We are creating our story every moment. Everything we do is creating our story. As a retired principal, when I go into a school, let's say I go into a school for a day or 2 days or a week, I almost always hear very early on, oh, when so-and-so was here as principal, blah, 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 blah. And you hear the amazing stories, you hear the horror stories, and you hear the stories that were disasters. Those principals and those leaders that were doing their work at the time probably didn't think that while I'm doing this, I'm actually writing my story that will be told by others, and I have absolutely no control of what they're going to say. So how about if I write the story in a way that allow people to have a way of retelling the story about collaborative practice, about valuing human beings, about recognizing the students as human, 100% human being, recognize that regardless of who we are, we come to the table with a different set of cultural values than the people we're serving. And I'm going to be blunt. Because I am Black and I go into a space that is mostly Black or has lots of Black, doesn't mean that I know them all. I need to learn them still. We can't teach what we don't know. And my experience is not the sum total of everybody else's experience. And I got to know what your experience is if I'm going to meet you where you are. That's how we lead from where we are. And that's how we challenge the status quo.
AI and technology are reshaping learning, assessment, and teaching identity, requiring us as principals and teachers to move from delivering content to developing critical thinking skills. Student success is influenced not only by our effort, but also by systemic factors, resources, culture, and the learning environment that we as principals and teachers help to create. What caught your attention in this podcast? Send me an email to stan@restorative.ca. I'd love to hear from you. Student outcomes don't happen by accident. They're produced by systems, and it's a legacy that you actually write daily through everyday decisions and interactions. Why not send me an email to stan@restorative.ca, and we can have a conversation about leading from where you are.